Addiction is a symptom of something much deeper, but many people choose to bypass that depth in exchange for an easier way out. Join me and Ronnie Landis for an enlightening conversation that will have you rethinking addiction and this matrix that we've all found ourselves in. In this episode, you'll learn why most former addicts remain in a state of victimhood, the difference between true transformation and temporary transformation, why we need to embrace our full emotional spectrum and not just love and light, why there's power in being able to hold the polarities in life, how to really exit the matrix, and Ronnie's four-quadrant model for human optimization. Ronnie Landis is a leading expert in holistic health, natural nutrition, and human potential. He powerfully supports driven entrepreneurs, athletes, performers, executives, and influencers to perform at their best mentally, emotionally, and physically. Exploring the fringes of cutting edge health sciences and food based nutrition, Ronnie combines customized self-mastery training, supplementation strategies, and a deep passion for helping others overcome long-held mental and emotional roadblocks so they can experience every area of their lives at their full potential. Make sure you grab a copy of Ronnie's newest book, The Addiction Free Lifestyle. You can find that at theaddictionfreelifestyle.com/book. And don't forget to grab a copy of my book, Potent Leadership. It's available on Amazon, or you can head to potentleadership.com. Now, whether you are a loyal listener or brand new to the podcast, please take a moment right now to hit pause and then drop a rating and review on iTunes, as well as download a few episodes. Every single rating, review, and download will help get this podcast out to more leaders around the world. Now it is time to exit the matrix by overcoming addiction with Ronnie Landis. Beyond the narrative, underneath the veil of illusion, and deep within your center, therein lies potent truth. Welcome to Potent Truth, where today's leaders, change makers, and light carriers come together to question the narrative, arrive at potent truth, and lead with sovereignty. What is potency? It's who you are beneath the masks, facades, and protective gear. It's the medicine humanity yearns for, cries out for, prays for, and needs. Your potency is what sets you apart, magnetizes your following, and creates movements. Join me, Ruby Fremon, for weekly guidance, channeled messages, and potent conversations that will take you on a journey of self-discovery. I am here to guide you to a place of unraveling the programming that's been keeping us stuck for generations, unlocking potent truth and expressing it through sovereign leadership. It's time for change. It's time for potent truth. Welcome to another episode of Potent Truth. And today I have another amazing guest. It's actually a friend that I feel like we've been in each other's peripherals for a while, but we only just connected since we now both live in Austin. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things that I think are going to interest you, especially today. So Ronnie Landis, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to dive into a conversation with you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. And I'm stoked because I feel like, first of all, we can go 1,000 different ways with this conversation, just with the world's events. And I know we can jam on a lot of that. And you have a new book, which is super exciting. And as a fellow author, I know what the journey of authorship is like. So I just want to celebrate you and honor you for releasing that new book into this world. And I'd love to talk about that. But more importantly, the topic of addiction, because this
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been
Mm-hmm.
spoken about on my podcast yet, other than just my own experiences. So, for everyone listening, Ronnie's new book is called Addiction Free Lifestyle, and you can go to theaddictionfreelifestyle.com/book to order your copy today. But, Ronnie, why don't you give us a little bit of a background story on
Mm-hmm.
why you're so passionate about talking about addiction free lifestyles?
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, so the addiction thing really didn't come up super pronounced until, I mean, it's always been in my periphery. So for the last 12 years, I've been steeped in the world of holistic health, nutrition, alternative healing, therapeutic modalities. I worked in an emergency room for about 3 years, like 12, 13 years ago or so. I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. I've seen everything that goes on in that world. And that really was part of an awakening that led me into the natural foods world, the natural therapy world, the natural medicine world, if you will, steeped into all forms of herbalism, um, all the longevity, all those like healing modalities. And then that took me into shamanism and plant medicines and, deep explorations into the world of transformation. And so it's interesting because I've written 7 books over the last 12 years. I was going back through one of my original books, and there's actually a chapter on drug addiction. And I was like, oh, whoa, that's interesting. And I remember writing it, and I was like, oh, yeah, you were onto this way back then. But it was more from like an observer, researcher perspective.
Mm,
And so this had been weaving itself through my awareness and through my research for many years. But I think when 2020 hit, it became more personal for me because through the intensity and the pressure in my own life, and then having to navigate the external world, and also going through many plant medicine ceremonies and working with psychedelics and things of that nature, it took me deep into my own internal traumas, childhood traumas, relational traumas. And I started to go into patterns like what we would call compensation patterns or compensatory patterns to compensate for wounding, trauma, triggers, stress, all that kind of thing. And then it became very clear to me that I had developed certain addiction patterns.
mm,
um and then that kind of confronted me on that front. And then so I had to work through that, and writing the book was very therapeutic for me because I could write from a perspective of deep research, science, and also personal experience. And I felt like spirit was guiding me through my own journey with addiction to be able to speak about the nuances that are rarely ever talked about, and to connect a lot of different dots together through all the years of all the research and exploration that I've been doing, in a way that's incredibly unique, a way that I've never seen done before. And that was part of my journey. And then it just became clear to me through navigating world events and unpacking all the things going on in the world, infinite amount of rabbit holes. I mean, I spent about a year and a half exclusively researching and deep diving into the mysteries of this world and the
mhm,
illusions that were being unveiled. And what I came to realize, I came up against multiple like threshold points within my own psyche where I had gone so deep to a point where I kept hitting walls.
mhm,
And I kept realizing that, okay, the rabbit hole is infinite. It never ends. And at some point, we need to figure out what is the key in the lock here to the matrix, because we're in a particular matrix, and there's an external matrix, and then there's the matrix of the mind, which is what I did a lot of deep exploration into with psychedelic and plant medicine work, and trauma therapeutic work and that kind of thing. And so that led me into realizing that, from my perspective, the thing that traps us is our addictions, this matrix, if you will, this culture that we're all wrapped up in, is based on addiction. And the way that it traps us is creating addicts that are obsessed with consumerism, that are always consuming, that are having to reach outside of ourselves to medicate the void, the trauma wound disconnect that we feel within us. And there's always something outside of us that we need to ease this, for me, this existential angst. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've been going through this for years, on and off, this existential pressure that I had been feeling, and I couldn't figure out how to deal with it. I couldn't figure out how to quell that pain or that pressure. And so that kind of took me into my own addiction, and then realizing that the way through this quote unquote matrix, if you will, is actually overcoming our addictions.
Mm-hmm.
And addiction comes in many different forms. Ultimately, the real addiction is the addiction to who we're accustomed to being, the version of us that is limited, the version of us that is rooted in some form of victimhood. And then there's all the associated patterns, habits, beliefs, and behavioral patterns that keep that identity in place,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like unpacking all of that through the writing process of the book. And then as the book came into the world, it became very clear to me that this was now my mission,
Mm.
to bring this message forth and to bring this work forth. And then my own healing process was, and still is, the realization that in order to do that, I have to actually embody it. So I'm still
Mm-hmm.
in that process myself. And that's where I found the healing happen.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, like bringing this back to you, because I think
Mm-hmm.
as teachers and leaders, it's really easy for us to just preach. What's tough is the embodiment, and that's what's actually missing from this space in the world of personal development and spiritual development. So I think our listeners will find it really helpful to know that you are in the practice of embodying this. And I'm curious to know, because I definitely want to talk about. There's a few things I made a note on, but 2020, for
Mm-hmm.
example, over the past, 19, 20 months, we have actually seen a rise in addiction, um, for a multitude of reasons, right? It's hard to cope with what's going on in the world. A lot of people are in solitude and isolation, away from their families. There's a lot. And as someone who dealt with addiction, I also know what it's like to want to seek out something just to numb the pain, to ease the pain, to help me just navigate my day to day life. Like, just
Mm-hmm.
give me
Mm-hmm.
something to cut off these emotions so I can just get through my day.
Yep.
And that quickly becomes really toxic because it's not so much, in my experience, it wasn't so much the substance. Yes, the substance had a chemical process of which my brain would get addicted to. And I was just addicted to not feeling my feelings. I became
Mm-hmm.
addicted to feeling numb because that allowed me what I thought, that allowed me the ability to actually move about my day. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's what a lot of people are doing now. And this is such an important topic to talk about, but I want to know if you're willing to get a little more personal
Yep.
about your experience in 2020.
Yeah. 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 No, no problem. So when 2020 happened, I got into a very quick marriage with a woman that I'd known for about 3 years, but I mean, we really just jumped full on into it, and it made all the sense in the world when we did. And of course, when you do such a thing, and there's such a powerful like magnetic pull between two people, a lot's going to come up. And we spent every single day together. I mean, for the better part of that entire year, and a lot did come up. There was a lot of healing that happened, but there was also a lot of unresolved aspects of self on both parts. But just speaking for myself, there was a lot of, like, I would say, glitches in the integration process, and a lot of really powerful awarenesses that emerged, but not enough space, or not enough, I'd say, conscientiousness on my part to really like anchor those things in to the point where it became the new operating system.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of like a little bit of a push and pull, and things would keep coming up. And then adding into when everything started to hit with the pandemic, and it felt like a tidal wave within the collective, like a momentum wave was just ushering itself into the collective consciousness, and we all felt it. And when it hit, I mean, it just hit really hard, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden I found myself going from, a particular focus with my message and my mission business. All of a sudden I am being thrusted into every element of the conspiratorial conversations that I had been surveying for many years, but it became real.
Mm-hmm.
Like it got really real all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden. And that became my focal point. And there were many times where I wouldn't be able to be present for the relationship because I'd be off in Sedona, like going on like a 3 or 4 mile hike, listening to certain information, unwinding my own thought process. And I have to say, I developed a bit of a what we might call an addiction to that.
Mm-hmm.
And but it didn't feel like that, because that felt like the most important thing in the world. That felt like this is what's happening, this is the awakening, this is what's being
Mm-hmm.
unearthed. And not only am I sensing it outside of me, I'm feeling every bit of it within me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that reinforced, spending so much time on social media, putting out posts, just like deep in it, right? Along with that came a tobacco habit, because that was an easy way to manage the energy that I was processing. And then at some point, I got really into MDMA, which was very helpful at times, like very helpful for unwinding the baggage in my mind and doing that. But eventually what happens is the brain associates a certain substance or a certain thing with the breakthrough, with the epiphany, with
Mm-hmm.
the heightened state of feeling. And so I started doing that quite a bit. And then that reinforced the tobacco, that reinforced the rabbit holes. I mean, it just is so eventually all these things had a reinforcement to one another,
Mm-hmm.
and it got tighter until things in my life started to get really scattered. And none of that actually could really help me manage the internal state that I started to develop, which was just like heightened stress, a lot of mental chatter, like an inability to like even stay focused on what I'm focused on. It was like
Mm-hmm.
just so many different things that I was hopscotching from in a given day. And so, the relationship itself went through a lot of strain, and we ended up exiting out of that through necessity at the finale of that. And that was part of a big wake up call for me to really address what was going on internally, and the patterns and habits that I had developed as a coping mechanism. And the thing about this too is that there's no judgment, because when I look back on it, it's almost like I totally get it. It's like, man, like you were going through things that most people can't even comprehend. And it just made perfect sense that I would go to those tools to support me. I would do it differently now, knowing what I know, but
Mm-hmm.
so there's an innocence involved in all this too. There's no judgment. There's an innocent quality. It's just like you're looking for things to support you, like you said, and to manage your day to day and try to keep the ship going and trying to stay afloat. But the problem is that when you're living your life just staying afloat, that's the best you're going to be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be a point where you let go of the safety raft, especially if it has a leak in it already. And
Mm-hmm.
then make your best attempt to swim back onto shore, and then reset, reevaluate, and then chart a course forward. So I had to do that, and it was very challenging, wasn't easy. There was a lot of confusion, but ultimately the beauty in it is that it did lead me to this greater purpose, which is now to support people in the addiction and trauma recovery process. Because what I realized too is that with all these addictions, they're just symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
right? These are all just symptoms, just like every form of disease and illness is ultimately just a symptom from the body to feedback to a deeper issue that really requires a spiritual solution. And so
Mm-hmm.
it deepened my relationship with God, and even seeking that out, it was incredibly humbling. And trauma is deeply linked to all this. And I'll just conclude on this, like what 2020 was to me was the amplification of all the deeply held trauma within the collective, within Gaia, within this planet as a whole, and then within each one of us individually. And there's many of us who understand that and are earnestly doing the work and feeling our way through. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's many people that are lost at sea, that have no real awareness of what's going on, and they're just doing their best to medicate, numb, and sedate themselves because they're hoping that the world is going to go back to the way that it was. And as we know, and thankfully so, it's not going to go back to the way it was. It can only go forward. And yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of the cliff notes on that journey.
Yeah, and thank you for your transparency and sharing that. I think the importance of sharing that is to showcase that addiction comes in very different forms. You know, when usually when you say the term addiction or addict, people think about drugs and alcohol and they have a specific visual in their head, but they
Mm-hmm,
don't see
mm-hmm.
people like us and how we coped and the different forms that addiction can take into place. And I also really resonate when you said addiction is a symptom because, and this is going to be hard for a lot of people to hear, uh, but it really is. There's always
Mm-hmm,
something that is causing the person to reach out to the external thing to which they become addicted to. You
mm-hmm,
know, it's
mm-hmm.
not the actual substance. And people don't become addicts out of some internal malicious intent.
That's right.
It's to try and ease something, to comfort themselves, to ease their pain, to ease their suffering, whatever it is. So like you said, it is very innocent how we get into this, and it is a very spiritual journey to come out on the other side. um, I'd love to talk more about the exit from the addictive mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and how you see that, because I think um so AA works for people, and for that, cool. And it didn't work for me. I just didn't resonate with it. I was like, I don't want to call myself an addict for the rest of my life. I feel like you're keeping me in victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like more and more people are starting to feel that with um, solutions like AA.
Yeah.
And again, for some people, it works. For people like me and you, it just doesn't resonate. I don't
Yeah.
want to be kept in a victim mindset. I want to come out of it feeling like
Mm-hmm,
the victor
mm-hmm,
and feeling like I am
mm-hmm,
in control of my life. And so I
mm-hmm.
would love for you to share your thoughts on the exit strategy from the addictive mindset.
Yeah, beautiful. Ultimately, the exit strategy is to it's one of transcending and including. So like in Ken Wilber's work on spiral, well, he didn't do this, but he speaks on it, spiral dynamics. It's really like another model of the scales of consciousness and how it spirals up in like a fluid kind of thing. And there's this term transcend and include. So a lot of times, especially in the transformational world, we're trying to transcend ourselves from where we've been to a different version of ourselves, but we miss out on the integration of all that we've been. And that ultimately is the key. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the challenge that I was reaching in the prior dynamic I was in, the relationship and just life in general, was that I wasn't giving enough space to really integrating. Like I had the awarenesses, I had the breakthroughs, I knew how to move through things, but I kept falling back. It was just push and pull, and just repeating old karmic cycles. And then I realized that, okay, like it's one thing to be able to intellectually or even spiritually transcend something in a medicine ceremony or even in a breakthrough experience. It's a very different thing to be able to integrate it over the day to day 3D reality.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of transformation, like what's an actual transformation? It's something that stands the test of time
Mm,
and it has staying power. And it's not something that it's not like I'm trying to get away from who I've been. I'm honoring the journey. I'm even speaking into it now. I'm honoring the challenges that I've been through, and knowing that it's about learning the lessons and making the corrections.
mhm,
And that's the humbling journey of whether it's reversing a disease or reversing an addiction or whatever it is that we're trying to overcome in our life. It's a very honest and humbling journey. And so the exit strategy, I guess in a nutshell, is it's like, yeah, with AA it's very rooted in victimhood. So first of all,
mm,
we have to exit out of victimhood altogether. So it's
mhm,
it's one of taking absolute ownership and responsibility for my thoughts, my
mhm,
feelings, my actions, and even the things that have happened to me in my life, the childhood traumas. One of the interesting things, I riff on this a lot of times about my whole rant on time, and time's an illusion. And one of the interesting things about that is we actually get stuck in time. What I mean by that is when you have a childhood wound, say something has happened to you. I know most women can relate to, like, sexual trauma, many men as well. Whatever the thing is, when you're a child, when you have a trauma that's been inflicted upon you, you don't have the ability to process it through. So it gets
mhm,
stuck and stored in the body. And so there's a part of us that is emotionally stuck in time.
mm,
It's emotionally stuck at the age in the moment where the traumatic imprint was enacted. And so there's a part of us that's emotionally and maybe even psychologically undeveloped. And so that needs to be brought back into the present moment, because I'm sure, as you know, with trauma, we can be repeating traumatic experiences as if we're experiencing it now in the moment, but it
mhm,
has nothing to do with now. So that's the kind of the split.
mhm,
Sometimes we toggle back between the past and the present, or the past and the future, but we're never fully present. So that's interesting. So the exit is actually getting so fully present and so fully embodied in the here and now that we're able to even see the exit door. Because a
mm,
lot of times we're so stuck in the dark, we can't even see the door in front of us,
mhm,
and that door is always there. And the door represents a choice point. It's being able to make the choice that I'm ready to move through the door. And we can't do that if we feel like a victim. We can't do that if we don't simply just take ownership and accountability for every single thing that we've participated in and how we've co-created everything in our life up to this moment. Once we can do that, and not just intellectually, but we can do it somatically. And this is where breathwork practices come into hand, meditation practices, somatic healing practices, just getting super in our body and getting embodied and safe to feel our body. And then from that place, we can decide to walk through the door. And the door really is just liberation. It's letting go. A lot of people feel like, okay, I have to do this, this, and this, and this, and then I'll be okay. And
mhm,
that's a trap too. It's actually not about what we need to do. It's about a lot of times what we need to stop doing.
mm,
We need to reset, slow down. And that requires letting go of the things that do not serve us. And for some reason, I don't know exactly why, but for some reason, that seems to be the hardest part within the human condition. But once we're able to make that choice for ourselves and love ourselves enough to do that, everything seems to unfold from there.
mm. Yeah, I think it's because we've, as a society, have been taught this linear timeline
Right,
system.
right.
And as the generations have gone by, we've been taught to hustle, that speed is valued more than depth, that, you have to get this to do this to be this. when it's really the other way around. And so the idea of slowing down, the idea of self-contemplation, the idea of self-awareness, of really rooting down and getting real with ourselves can feel really scary, because in our 3D minds that feels like, okay, so wait, I have to stop, and then if I stop, then what's going to happen? Then I'm going to lose my
Right.
business, or I'm going to lose this, or I'm going to fall behind, or FOMO, whatever it is, right? But these are all just societal programming, examples of societal programming that have been projected upon us, you know? And when we can start to break through that, um, that's when we can actually gain the ability to see things clearly. And that's why I love what you said earlier about how the way through the matrix, and the matrix of life in general, not just this pandemic, but the entire fucking matrix, is to overcome addiction.
Yeah.
I love that, um, because I believe that human beings, like, we're all addicted to something. Like, we're all addicted to something. And I've also met a lot of people who become addicted to transformation, where they
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
that to the
Yep.
extreme. Let's talk about that.
Okay, no, that's amazing. You mentioned that. Beautiful woman in my life actually was reflecting that to me this morning. In a particular reflection to me that was really important, and that's very true. On the flip side of it, like, we can get so addicted to quote unquote transformation, personal development, plant medicine ceremonies,
Eating
psychedelic
healthy,
exploration,
raw
eating
food.
healthy. Oh yeah, and I've been through all of it. And what ends up happening is we can end up losing connection to our humanity,
Mm.
into the humanness within us. Then we get caught up in all these like pseudo personal development, pseudo spiritual ideas that end up isolating us from other people. And then oftentimes it becomes about, oh, it's somebody else and their issues or their wounds or their whatever. And I've seen this play out a lot of times. It's like, no, I got to create boundaries now. The thing with boundaries that I realized is that, and this is like a conversation that's going on like so many, and I realized with boundaries, it's like, I only need boundaries to the degree that I don't have healthy boundaries for myself, within myself. If
Mm.
I can create boundaries within myself and be in integrity with that in my truth, I'm going to need a lot less boundaries outside of me, because there's going
Mm-hmm.
to be more discernment. There's going to be more structure to my life. There's going to be, um, there's going to be a lot less leaky energy that's going to come into my life. And so, there's so many things that go along with that. I think ultimately it's about the middle way, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
about the Tao. It's about like what Siddhartha learned on his path to becoming the Buddha, which is that he could deprive himself, he could fast, he could go to near death and exhaustion, and he could go to heightened states of nirvana and deep meditation. But what he discovered was that no matter what, there was always this pain, there was always this suffering, there's always this sadness that followed these peak experiences. And it wasn't until he learned how to integrate the highs and the lows, the happiness and the sadness, because they're both part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think until we learn how to do that and be okay with it, the swing from happiness to sorrow, which is
Mm-hmm.
just a natural swing of the emotional spectrum, and not judge it, not try to control it, but just be with it and just flow with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're always going to be riding these dopamine roller coasters. Again, like all the things that you just mentioned, which are technically more productive and helpful, but they have the similar neurotic components, right? I've
Mm-hmm.
seen it layered all throughout the diet world. And
Mm-hmm.
the word diet has the word die in it. So
Mm.
people are like, that's a whole thing in of itself, just the energetics of all that. What I've personally learned by being in these communities is that it does end up coming back to the middle way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like being able to hold, two different perspectives or two different polarities, the dark and the light, the positive and negative, being able to hold that at the same time within myself, and also to love myself enough to just be right here right now with whatever is, Um, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's really, really well said. Being able to hold the polarities in all things, whether it's the polarity in our emotional spectrum from
Mm,
deep, deep grief or sorrow to the highest level of happiness and joy and
mhm,
elation,
mhm.
from shadow to light, and not getting stuck in either or. You
Right.
thinking that one is better than the other, and
Mhm.
then adopting a label. And this is something I see with even just the diet, whatever the diet is, whether vegan, plant based, carnivore, whatever it is. It's like human beings have this weird thing where we love to associate ourselves with a label
Right.
and stick ourselves in this box and let that define ourselves. But then people walk around like they're super proud of it. And I was that,
Mm,
I was plant
mhm.
based for a long time,
Yep.
and I was on and off plant based for a long time until one day I was sitting on the couch and my fork found its way to my husband's plate, grabbed a piece of meat and put it in my mouth, and I had no idea, totally unconscious. And it felt so good. And since that day, that was like four years ago, I just eat whatever my body needs, because
Mhm.
I eat whole foods. That's my only
Yeah.
rule, is like just eat real food. Okay, don't
Yeah.
eat packaged shit food. Um but I need to honor what my body needs, because our bodies are really divinely intelligent. And if we start to listen to our bodies more, we can gain a lot of information versus, like, again, listening to external sources, right? And with I want to segue a little bit, but also connect this with what's going on in the world today and the matrix that we're finding ourselves in, or that many people have known about for decades. And it's like, oh shit, it's finally here. I mean,
Yeah.
my matrix for me completely crumbled last year.
Mhm.
And with that helped me start see the illusions that we hold within ourselves, that come from the programming that is
Yeah.
bestowed upon us through the educational system, through the quote unquote healthcare system, through the um, you know trusted authority in quotation marks.
Uh-huh.
Like, there's just layers upon layers of programming. Like, no wonder we are a generation of addicts.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like all of this has been built to cut us off of our own life force. And I know you talk about this a lot, is the vitality and really getting back into connection with that. So let's talk about that, about vitality, about life force energy, about what's going on in the world right now, and how so many people are really just cut off from connecting to their truth and why.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a multi-layered conversation, but
Yeah.
I mean, simply put, it does first start. So I have a particular model that I've been presenting lately in my whole human optimization framework. And it's a four-quadrant model. It starts with the physical dimension, the mental dimension, emotional, and then spiritual. And then it's a roadmap on how to navigate each one of these dimensions, because each one has its own rule book.
Mm-hmm.
It has its own set of priorities and its own way to navigate. So you always start with the body, because that's what's real, that's what's here, that's what we're in. We have to master the physical body in order to be able to make it to the next rung, which is the mental body, the mind. And the mind is its own arena.
Mm-hmm.
So it has different rules than the physical body. But if we don't learn to master the physical body first and we try to skip over to the mind, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna encounter disassociative behaviors, especially if you include like psychedelics, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Then it starts to get into some really abstract territory. And then equally so, then once you go through the mental sphere, then you go into the emotional body. That's where you start to go into the underworld. And so that is a that and that represents the element of water, right? So then that's where a lot of people are stuck right now, because the emotional body, houses trauma, childhood trauma, sexual trauma, all the like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very hard area to navigate, for anybody without the right set of tools. And then from there is the spiritual quadrant, and then ultimately these all, when you heal one thing, it has like a singularity effect. It has a spontaneous healing of another from another dimension. So these things all ultimately, when you heal one thing, you heal another.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, so we start with the physical body first always. And so that starts with what we put into our body, our nutrition, cleaning up our nutrition, figuring out what actually works best for us with where we're at. We may be in a phase where we've been so toxic that we need to cleanse and detox. So we need to go on more of a minimalistic type of diet for a while. That might be like a raw food diet,
Mm-hmm.
um, cleansing, juices, green vegetable juices, that kind of thing. And then that's more of a catabolic approach, and you do that for a season. You don't do that for a lifestyle. And that's where so many people I found in the raw food world just went astray, and then did it for like 10 years, and then they're wasting away. But they have a belief system that's so strongly ingrained that this is the way.
Mm-hmm.
And you clearly are looking at them like, no, I don't know, dude, I don't think that's the way. Like you're withering away.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's where the lack of integration with the mind is showing itself in that particular department. So but then maybe you need to go on more of an animal foods approach. You need to be more anabolic. You need more of a primal energy. That's what I needed in 2020 after 10 years of being a vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
And that was incredibly powerful, and I'm still doing that today. And then like breath work and psychosomatic trauma releasing, and movement and fitness and strength training and yoga and flexibility and all that kind of sleep and recovery.
Mm-hmm.
These are the basic rules of the physical body. So before we go into all this other stuff, we need to dial those things in first, the basics, right? Once we get those things dialed in, especially our nutrition, our sleep patterns, when we get that dialed in, everything else starts to work better. Then we can go into how do we optimize our mind, our mindset, our attitude. What are we focusing on? How do we focus? If we've been scattered and unfocused, how do I discipline my mind? How do I feed my mind the right information? How do I develop a better attitude? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do I unpack the congestion in my mind? And that might mean, okay, I need to get off YouTube University for a while. I need to
Mm-hmm.
stop getting on social media and taking all this input, and I need to journal and unpack all the congestion in my mind so I can actually think straight. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. And then from there we can now go into like that deeper trauma work, and explore the childhood traumas and the mother wounds and the father wounds and maybe the relational attachment wounds, because now I have an ability to process physically through breath work and other means. I can safely process the emotions and the sensations that are arising in my nervous system, because I have more of a command and awareness of my physical body,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you can see, like, if you don't learn to ground into the physical body and you try to go right into that other stuff, it's going to be like a wild west. And that's what I see so much
Yeah.
in the healing world, is like it's a wild west of this modality, this
Mm-hmm.
teaching, that teaching. And it's like this perpetual process of healing, but not so much healed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a whole thing in of itself. And then from there, once we've become somewhat of an integrated human being with mind, body, and emotional area, then we can start to go into the spiritual and metaphysical area.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I went really quick into all that, as many of us do. I went into some very abstract territory. I think I'm kind of predisposed for this, but I also found that I got spun out quite a bit and very scattered in those dimensions, and had to, and that's where this model really birthed itself, is getting really scattered in those dimensions, because again, the spiritual world is a whole like it's a whole set of dimensions that exist outside of the physical body. So it requires us to be really, really rooted and anchored in our physical body, and
Hmm.
to have moved through enough of that stored trauma, so we can navigate that world. And yeah, so I mean, that's enough to say about that. So that's just kind of, that's my basic model that I use now to navigate the human experience. Because to me, it's really comes down to like, how do we optimize the human experience? That to me is the exit strategy. That's the solution to overcoming any of these proverbial limitations that we face.
Hmm.
Is, in other words, how do I envision a greater future than the one that I'm presently living, or the one that I'm accustomed to? Well, in order to do that, I have to actually be something. I have to become somebody very different than the version of me that I'm accustomed to being. And that's like a that's a full on endeavor. And that's
Hmm.
a holistic endeavor to embark on.
Yeah. And it's really interesting how you describe this model because it literally describes how, even just my awakening, healing journey of there was no way in hell that I could tackle my mental, emotional, or spiritual state, which I didn't have the threshold to get into at that time
Mm-hmm.
until I dealt with my physical body. And I was like, once I started to eat healthier, this is 2012. Once I started to eat healthier, to work out regularly, to start to really honor this physical 3D vessel, then I was able to tap into more of the mental, emotional traumas. And then I was able to tap into my spirituality in a very holistic way. Whereas prior to that, a lot of people don't know this, but I was actually giving psychic readings for a while. There was a
Oh,
window
wow.
of time, probably around 2008, no, 2007, 2006, 2007, when I had a massive awakening. My crown chakra just like blew open, and that's, I had seen spirits my entire life and was able to communicate, but not in this way. But I hadn't dealt with my physical body yet. I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
dealt with my mental, emotional state yet. And so I was blasted open and almost like left to my own. It almost felt like torture at times because I didn't know how to control it. I didn't know how to be in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I started integrating these other pieces that I can now become more grounded in my spirituality and more grounded in my awakening. And we see this everywhere. We see this in the plant medicine space. We see this in personal development. A lot of people now rushing into like claiming to be 5D, 7D, woke, whatever the fuck it is. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like, the
Yeah.
next trend is probably going to be 10D, but it's like,
Mm.
dude, we live on planet Earth in the 3D. Like, have you
Yep.
mastered your physical body yet?
Right.
And I don't know if you've noticed this, but it feels like all the quote unquote conspiracy theorists are the ones who have actually mastered the physical level and
Mm-hmm.
take care
Mm-hmm.
of themselves and take care of their health and have dealt with their mental and emotional bodies and have come into that spiritual place in a grounded way. Whereas, there are a lot of people in the spiritual community who are not seeing this, the illusion and the
Yeah.
matrix, but it's
Mm-hmm.
because they kind of bypassed all that work to deem themselves as ultra spiritual 7D, whatever the fuck they want to claim.
Yeah, yeah. I encountered this last weekend with someone where she's just like, I started getting into some things, and she's like, I remember what she said something. It was just like a bypass. She's just like, well, like wherever I go, I just choose love and light. And I was like, okay, like I get that. And it's also good to be very aware of the environment that you're in and what's going on. And she just was like, she started getting like kind of like flustered, and she's like, I'm just feeling like this really negative energy. And I just kind of like bowed out and walked away. And I was just like, yeah, those are the unresolved feelings inside of yourself that you're unwilling to feel. That's
Mm-hmm.
the darkness inside of you that you're unwilling to feel. And it's now being projected onto someone else, or like they caused it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's a real issue. And to your point, that is the issue, is that people are bypassing their physicality, and what comes along with your physicality is a whole stored database of memories childhood memories, traumas, ancestral memories, um, things that are not comfortable, things that we don't want to feel. I mean, just in the most simple example, say you're just getting into like strength training, or you're just getting into like yoga, and you're really static and inflexible, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an indication that this isn't good for you. It's an indication that you need to wake your body up,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's static. It needs to be opened up and expressed. And right now it is expressing itself to you in a form that is not comfortable. But if you stick with it and you create a routine out of it, then it will start to get easier, and it'll start to liberate that static energy. But unfortunately, so many people are so used to the shortcut, and that's, by the way, that's really what addiction is chasing pleasure to avoid pain,
Mm-hmm.
chasing comfort to avoid discomfort, because we've been told that the discomfort or anything outside of your highest excitement in the moment is not good. And I completely disagree with that. Like, follow your inspiration, but also don't bypass the road work in front of you.
Mm. Yeah, really well said. Really well said. It's the habit of bypassing that we're seeing a lot of right now, especially just with the disillusionment of the world. Like,
Mm,
let's just take the easy road. Let's just take what feels easier. Let's just stick in our comfort zone. Let's bypass the hard work to get to the thing just so that we can get to the thing really quickly. Again, the societal programming of like, it's crazy. Like it's like we've lost touch with depth and expansion,
right.
and instead it's like a race to the top and to this
Mm,
weird
mm.
invisible finish line that no
Yeah,
one's ever going
yeah.
to attain.
Uh-huh.
So right now, with the disillusionment and the matrix shattering, I'm hoping that more and more people actually wake up to the infinite power and divine wisdom that we have within just our own bodies, within
Right.
our own minds, and start to really do the work of integration, because that's the real work. It's easy
Mm-hmm,
to read a
mm-hmm.
book, it's easy to attend a seminar, it's easy to collect knowledge, to listen to podcasts, especially with all the content that's being thrown at us every day. This shit is easy. Consuming is easy.
Mm-hmm.
What's tough is taking what you've consumed and integrating it into workable knowledge
Right.
in the body, in the system. And that, I feel, is like the next step for human evolution, is like to get out of this rat race and back into our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on, exactly. And it is that discomfort of taking something that you hear that resonates and putting it into practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we mean by embodiment. If anyone's not quite clear on that, it just means you just need to breathe and meditate. That's certainly part of it. But it's actually practicing putting the thing into practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very obvious when we talk about like fitness or movement or nutrition. It's harder to do, but once you get into a rhythm and you start to feel the effects of it, feeling better just feels better, and then you just want to do more of it, and it creates its own momentum, and it creates a greater momentum than the stagnated momentum that you built up through the addictions. Like, a
Mm-hmm.
positive force has a much more powerful effect than a negative force, but it's your ingrained belief pattern about yourself that's associated with the I guess the momentum that you've built up. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really just a trick that your mind plays on you. The thing is, like, none of this is dependent on time and space. It's all dependent on making connection. It's like, I guess an example I could use is like, you don't need a certain amount of time, like in a romantic intimate connection with someone. It's not based on a certain amount of time that two people get to know each other. It's based on depth of connection. When
Mm-hmm.
two people feel a connection and they're present to it, that's when the magic happens. That could happen in a day, it could happen in a moment, it could happen over the course of months or a year. It's not dependent on time. It's the same thing with our own development, if you will. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you go and you work out for the first time in a while, it could happen right there, but the resistance that that we build up between the thought of, oh, I should do this, and actually doing it is the negative force that creates it creates the resistance. So the
Mm-hmm.
quicker that we can get through that and just think, okay, I need to connect with this thing, this practice, this habit, this version of me that's going to manifest itself in the action, in the doing, or in other words, in the embodiment, because that's why we do these things. That's why we do whatever it is that we do, because we're looking to embody a version of ourselves that naturally happens when we're doing the things that we are wanting to do, but maybe we've been resisting doing.
Mm-hmm. So true. The resistance is real, and it's a lot. It's
I
something that a
feel it
lot of people
every
are.
I feel it every day.
Yeah, it's there. It's present, and it's something that we get to face. You know, if we got to
Mm.
face what we're resisting. Ronnie, we're reaching the end of this episode, and like I said at the beginning, I feel like we could talk about any like so many
Mm-hmm.
different things. But I'd love to know, what is like one potent truth you want to leave our listeners with.
Hmm. What I want to say is that you are more than you think you are.
Mm.
You, who you are and what you are, is so much more than you've been led to believe, both by society, your parents, your friends, and by yourself. You are capable of literally anything that you choose, and it is simply a choice. And along with that potent truth, I just want to say that the only thing that is getting in the way with who you've been and who you can be is the addiction patterns that are holding you back from becoming the greatest version of yourself.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, really well said. And I think if you need to listen to that again, just hit rewind and listen to that again, let it really drop in. Ronnie, thank you so much for being here and sharing your presence and wisdom with our listeners. I really appreciate you, and I look forward to future conversations.
Thank you so
Definitely.
much.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, be sure to get a copy of Ronnie's new book at theaddictionfreelifestyle.com/book. Um, so for now, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Potent Truth, where we are taking on a journey to challenge illusion and lead with sovereignty. Make sure you connect with Ronnie and I outside of the podcast on social media. The links and more will be in the show notes. If you like this episode, if you found it helpful, please share it with a friend and drop a rating and review on iTunes. And I will see you back here on Monday for a brand new episode of Potent Truth. Aho, family.